Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 77 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, what is going on?
What's happening, man?
Nothing. I'm ready to go. I'm fired up.
Ready to do it.
Ready to do it.
All right, man.
Part 2 of the Elizabeth Short murder.
Yeah. The final installation.
That's a good word for it.
Yeah.
But first, let's get to our new Patreon supporters.
Let's do it.
We had Joan Lawson.
Hey, Joan.
Kirsten Wilkie.
Thank you, Wilkie.
Barry McLaughlin.
Thanks, Barry.
Renee Jennings.
Hey, Renee.
Nicole Rooney.
Thanks, Roonies.
Melissa.
Melissa.
Georgina Drinkwater.
Drink that water.
I'm loving that name.
Yeah.
James Lovecraft.
Love crafty. Good loving.
Caroline Spellman.
Yeah.
Kelsey Christensen jumped out at our highest level.
There's a name.
We had Mark Engelhard.
Yeah.
Zoe Kuntz.
Thank you, Zoe.
Crystal Lustel Connery.
Sounds like a drink.
Yeah. Can I have the Crystal Lustel Connery?
Lustel.
In a tall glass. I want it chilled.
Yes.
Shaken, not stirred.
40 degrees, please.
She jumped out at our highest level.
Yeah.
Tracy Bailey.
Hey, Tracy.
And then we had probably a distant cousin to you, Molly Gibson.
Hey, Molly.
Somewhere down the line.
Good golly, Miss Molly.
Exactly. If we go back into the vault, Gibbs.
Yeah.
This week we selected Gina Oibunko.
Good old Boinko.
Not even close. I don't think you could have been any further away. I'm not saying I pronounced it right, but there's no way you could have been any further from what it really is.
I just can't get it right, you know? On the T-Cat one, I couldn't get it. I just can't get it, you know? I try.
But we appreciate Gina. She's been a Patreon supporter for a long time.
Thank you, Gina.
We appreciate all of the new Patreon supporters, those people that continue to support us month after month. We have a lot of PayPal support, too. Joan Lawson, who at the same time did Patreon and PayPal.
And that Joan, doubling up on us. Thank you.
Amazing. Caleb Paul Jones.
Thank you.
Connie Van Onselder.
Von Santa, what?
No.
I had to stop because I wasn't even going to get there.
Because you were wrong from literally the first
out of the gate
syllable.
Yeah.
Gunn Christensen.
Gun.
So a lot of PayPal support, which we really, really appreciate.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Now we have to make an announcement, Gibbs. We're not going to be putting out an Unsolved episode next week.
Nope.
We're taking a break.
Taking a day off.
We are putting out a Patreon-only episode.
Patreon.
Our first ever.
Yep.
I said it that way because of you. I know you like to say it with a
French
Creole accent.
That's right. Patreon.
So if you're not signed up for Patreon, now's a good time to do it. We're going to put out this first episode, and we have plans to put out more.
Yeah. Check it out.
Now, on True Crime All the Time, episode is out right now on Melvin Ignato.
Yeah, wow.
And this case fascinated me, Gibbs, on like a bunch of different levels. Ignato murdered his girlfriend, got away with it, and then you get, double jeopardy comes into play. An ex-girlfriend gets involved in the mix. There's all kinds of different things going on with this case. All right, Gibby, can we get into the second and final part of the Elizabeth Short murder, known as the Black Dahlia?
Yeah.
So when we left off in part 1, we had finished up with the details of the murder and the crime scene. And obviously we talked about her background a lot. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on the investigation, the suspects, to, finish it up. So on January 21st, 1947, a person claiming to be Short's killer placed a phone call to the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner, and this person congratulated the newspaper on its coverage of the case and stated that he planned on eventually turning himself in. But he wasn't going to do it right away. He wanted to allow police to pursue him for some time. It sounds to me like he wanted to play a cat and mouse game.
Yeah.
Because he goes on to tell the newspaper to, quote, expect some souvenirs of Beth Short in the mail. That would be an eerie phone call to take. But again, no way to know. Is this a real call? Is this the real killer? Or because, as we talked about in episode 1, there was so much media coverage of this case. Are you going to have people coming out of the woodworks to mess around, mess with the cops,
right?
Play games? Now, a few days later, a suspicious manila envelope was discovered by a U.S. Postal Service worker, and the envelope was addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers. So, Gibbs, kind of a strange way to address an envelope. You're not addressing it to one person or one entity. I mean, it is addressed to one entity, but then a whole bunch of others. And the way that it was addressed, the person that mailed it used individual words cut from newspaper clippings, pasted onto the envelope. Also included on the envelope was a large message, also cut and pasted from newspaper clippings that read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings with letter to follow." Now, the envelope contained Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, names written on pieces of paper, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen embossed on the cover. Now, this whole envelope had been wiped down, cleaned with gasoline, similar to how Elizabeth Short's body had been cleaned. And this led police to suspect that this package had been sent directly by her killer. But even still, they were able to lift several partial fingerprints from the envelope. They sent them on to the FBI for testing. But somehow, Gibbs, the fingerprints were compromised in transit, and they were not able to be properly examined. The same day that the envelope was received by the examiner, a handbag and a black suede shoe were reported to have been seen on top of a garbage can in an alley that was just 2 miles from where Short's body had been discovered. The items were picked up by police, but they too had also been wiped clean with gasoline in what you would think, Gibbs, is an attempt to destroy fingerprints.
Yeah. I mean, 2 miles is really not that close, but not that far, I guess. I mean, when they say 2 miles.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're just reporting on how far away it was.
Yeah.
I don't know what you make of it as, in relation to as far as the distance, but.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty safe spot to drop something off, I think. You're not right on the murder scene for sure. 2 miles out from it.
Oh, I think to that point, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You're far enough away that I don't think anybody's staking out something 2 miles away from where the body was found. Now we get back to Mark Hansen, right? His name was embossed on the cover of this address book. Police quickly identified him as a suspect. And Mark Hansen was a wealthy nightclub and theater owner, and he was an acquaintance of Elizabeth Short. And Short had actually stayed at Mark Hansen's house at times with some of her friends. And on top of that, Hansen was the person that confirmed that the purse and shoe found in the alley did in fact belong to Elizabeth Short. Elizabeth's friend and roommate Ann Toth told investigators that Short had recently rejected sexual advances from Hansen. And of course, Gibbs, authorities are going to look at that as a potential motive, a cause for him to maybe kill Elizabeth Short.
Yeah, man, it makes him a prime suspect, I would think.
I would think so. The LAPD interviewed over 150 men in what was about a 2 or 3 week time span.
It's a lot.
Who they believe to be potential suspects. It is a lot. But we're also talking Los Angeles, so there's a lot of people, even back then. Not as many as there are today, and we talked about Robert Manley in episode 1. He was the salesman that had a pregnant wife at home, had brought Elizabeth Short back to LA from San Diego, and was one of the last people to see her alive. So obviously police are going to investigate him, and they did, but he was cleared of suspicion after passing a number of polygraphs. Police interviewed people that were found listed in Mark Hansen's address book, including one man by the name of Martin Lewis, who had been a known acquaintance of Elizabeth Short. Lewis was able to provide an alibi for the day of Short's murder. And it was a pretty good alibi. He was in Portland, Oregon, visiting his father-in-law who was dying of kidney failure. So we talked about 150 potential suspects, but there were 750 investigators from the LAPD, other law enforcement agencies who worked on this case in its early stages. That is a lot of law enforcement personnel. I mean, we're talking 400 sheriff's deputies, 250 California State Patrol officers.
Yeah, I mean, they're just searching all kind of locations, man. They're searching dumpsters, they're searching storm drains, they're searching anything, abandoned structures. They're going up and down the Los Angeles River. Anything, anywhere that they might be able to find any type of lead.
But that is a lot of manpower.
That is.
Being expended.
Expensive, too.
No, expensive, sure.
Yeah.
We talk about that a lot. But they don't find anything, right? They don't uncover any evidence.
You even get a local councilman, and he puts up $10,000 for a reward.
How much do you think that would be today, Gibbs?
I'm going to say it's like $112,000 today.
It seems oddly specific. Did you look that up beforehand?
Should it be $111,999?
Just wondering if you looked that up ahead of time.
I'm just going off my gut. So he puts it up there for any information that leads to the arrest of whoever did this to Elizabeth.
So it's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money.
A lot of money back in that day. And after that announcement is made about the reward, you have all kinds of people coming forward with confessions.
Which always drives me crazy when they're false confessions. I don't understand that.
I don't get it either. Now, the majority of these are easily dismissed by police as false. But the other thing that happens, and we don't hear about this a lot, it probably happens, we just don't hear about it. Some of these people that came in to make false confessions were actually charged with obstruction of justice.
And I'm glad they were, because it drives me crazy.
Well, there should be some type of penalty because it's very detrimental, right, to the investigation if you have to chase down all these leads that are not true. On January 26th, the Examiner received a handwritten letter. And I think it's important to point out, Gibbs, these letters are coming in very quick succession.
Yeah.
Right? Within a matter of a week, there's been a phone call, the envelope, and now a handwritten letter. And this handwritten letter read, "Here it is. Turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger." The letter also named the location at which the supposed killer was going to turn himself in. Police waited at this location on the morning of January 29th, but no one showed up. Instead, around 1 p.m. that day, the Examiner received another cut and paste letter, which read, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." So again, going back to the media coverage in this case, I mean, here's this is part of the reason why there was so much interest. You have a lot of strange things going on. We talked about the graphic nature of the crime. You have this communication now by somebody claiming to be the murderer. That's going to be very fascinating for readers.
It will, man. I mean, it's going to definitely take the readership up of all the newspapers.
And it does, right? Not just local there in Los Angeles. The national publications start to increase their coverage of the story. But what happens is you get some bad reporting, right? You get some sensationalizing of the story.
Yes.
Some of which talks about the fact that Elizabeth had been tortured for hours before her death. Now, this information was false. Police knew it was false, but they really didn't do much to try to correct it because they didn't want to. Because the police were trying to conceal the true cause of death. So they were totally fine with false information going out there. But it wasn't just sensationalism around the murder of Elizabeth. It was also about her personal life. The papers printed articles about the alleged romantic advances of Mark Hansen. There was a stripper that was friends with Elizabeth Short that said she liked to get guys worked up over her, but she'd leave them hanging dry. And somehow the reporters took this, Gibbs, and started to look into the possibility that Elizabeth Short was a lesbian.
I mean, they're going to try and look up every possible angle, That's just what they're going to do.
Well, I can't overemphasize enough how the papers and media in general sensationalize things. They even went so far as to go into the gay bars in Los Angeles, questioning employees, questioning, people inside the bar, but they could never confirm that Elizabeth Short had visited these bars. That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to put this story together. Now, it wasn't just the Examiner that received letters. The Los Angeles Herald Express received several letters from the alleged killer, also made with cut and paste clippings. One of them read, "I will give up on Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." And not to belabor the point, Gibbs, but I think anytime you have a case like this where someone that may be the killer is communicating in this manner with the press, with the police, anything like that, it takes it to a whole nother level. I mean, if you think about Zodiac, if you think about BTK and cases like that, it adds another element to the story.
I mean, it really does.
That's what you came up with?
That's it. That's the deep.
That's the deep track.
That's the deep track right there, man.
On February 1st, the Los Angeles Daily News reported that the case had run into a stone wall. Investigators had no new leads to pursue, but the papers they just continued to run story after story on this murder. The Examiner in particular ran some type of story involving Elizabeth Short on the front page for 35 straight days.
That's a long time right there, man.
To be front page news. That is a very long time. In an interview, the lead investigator, Captain Jack Donahue, he told the press that he believed Short's murder had taken place in an isolated building or some type of shack on the border of Los Angeles. And then her body was moved into the city to the location where it was found.
And to me, that makes a lot of sense. Clearly it's not going to be done on that site.
No, we talked about that, right? The lack of blood. I think it would be impossible for her to have been killed and dissected at the location where she was found. So logically, you'd have to think that it was done in a more remote area.
Yeah.
But we also talked about the fact that the way she was dissected, it was done with some precision, the cuts. And this led the LAPD to look into the possibility that her killer may have been, a surgeon, a doctor, someone with some type of medical background with the knowledge to make these type of cuts. Now, I think there's a lot of other people in a lot of other professions, Gibbs, that could also make those type of cuts. I mean, could you look at a butcher?
Yeah.
Could you look at, somebody along those lines as well? Somebody that uses a knife for precise work?
Yes. K-bar knife.
A woodworker? I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out there. But, they did kind of focus there for a while on the medical angle. And to that fact, the LAPD served a warrant in mid-February. Now, we're all in 1947, right? I don't want anybody to get confused. We have not progressed very far chronologically.
No.
We've been talking about a month time frame here. But they served a warrant to the University of Southern California Medical School, which was located fairly close to where Elizabeth's body was found.
That's kind of interesting, too.
Yeah, well, if they're going down this medical angle, that would make sense. They requested a complete list of the program students. They did background checks on these people, but it didn't lead anywhere. Didn't turn up any new leads or any new evidence, theories, nothing. But there was another murder that occurred on February 10th, 1947, that police thought could possibly be connected to the killing of Elizabeth Short. And this was the murder of a woman by the name of Jean French in Los Angeles. Her body was discovered in West Los Angeles on Grandview Boulevard. She was found nude. She had been badly beaten. But what caused police to think there might be a connection was that written on her stomach in lipstick was what appeared to be the words, "Fuck you, BD," and then underneath that, the letters TEX, T-E-X. So I think some people have thought that the BD stands for Black Dahlia. And of course, the papers are going to run with this story, and it's covered heavily. Well, let's not forget the fact that these murders are, a month apart. But there have been a lot of people, including historians, people in academia, that have said that what was written on the stomach of Jean French was not BD, but actually PD, which they believe stood for police department.
Right.
So at this point in time, police have very few leads, no viable suspects. They have continued to run into a series of dead ends. By the spring of 1947, the case is pretty cold already. And that's a short period of time. But they had a lot of people working it, and they weren't finding anything. And there were people in law enforcement, including, detectives specifically working the case, that blamed the press, saying that they compromised the investigation. You had all these reporters out trying to, find details out on their own. You had a lot of reporting that turned out to be false. In September of 49, a grand jury convened to discuss the inadequacies in the LAPD's homicide unit. So this was based on their failure to solve numerous murders, and especially murders involving women and children in the past several years. In the aftermath of that grand jury, there was more investigation done on Short's past, some of which we covered in episode 1, but you had detectives tracing her movements through the years between Massachusetts, California, and Florida, but you had them going out to these states and interviewing people that knew her, trying to find any connection they could. They went to Texas. They went to New Orleans and Louisiana. But none of these interviews yielded any useful information about her murder. We talked about people coming forward and making false confessions. But at one point, Gibbs, that number reached 500. 500 different people confessed to the murder of Elizabeth Short.
That is a lot, man. That's just a lot of people.
Why?
I don't get it.
Seeking notoriety. I mean, I'm sure you had some people in there that maybe had some type of mental illness, but I don't get it.
What if one of them was the real one? Just nobody believed.
And they thought it was false. They couldn't verify it, so they said, "Hey."
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't just people coming in, I think, and confessing to the crime themselves. I think there were also a lot of, you had relatives trying to turn in their family members.
Yeah.
saying that they killed Elizabeth Short. You probably had jilted ex-lovers trying to pin it on somebody they were mad at.
Neighbors, who knows?
Neighbors that were mad. Yeah, you had a lot of that as well.
You'd be turning in that neighbor next door.
I would.
Every time he cuts that grass, man.
Well, to your point, Gibbs, what if they did really have the real killer come in? One of the original detectives on the case, it was a man by the name of Ralph Asdell, many years later, in the 2000s, told the Los Angeles Times that he believed he had interviewed Short's killer. This is a man that he said had been seen with his car parked near the vacant lot where Elizabeth's body was discovered in January of 1947. So apparently there was someone that stopped at the vacant lot to dispose of a bag of lawn clippings, saw this car parked there with its right rear door open, and the driver of the car was standing in the vacant lot where Elizabeth's body was found. When the guy with the lawn clipping showed up, it startled this other guy, the owner of the car. He got in his sedan and drove away. But this guy standing in the lot was ultimately cleared of suspicion by police, but as late as 2003. I mean, this detective, Asdell, still believed that he was the killer of Elizabeth Short. Now, when we get into suspects, Gibbs, there are a number of them. Because the case is old, there's been a lot of books written about the case. There's been a lot of experts and people that have looked into the case. So, with that type of scrutiny is going to come a very large list of suspects. Depending on which book you read, you might like one suspect over another. I mean, we've already talked about a few: Hansen, Robert Manley, but there is a whole list of names. There was an author that said his favorite suspect was a man that he claimed impregnated Elizabeth Short. And we're going to talk about some of these suspects in more detail, but I just want, to give everybody a sense of how many names there are floating out there. I mean, I'm not going to run through them all. It would take forever to even list all of the names.
There's a lot.
But we will get into some. But first, I want to talk about some crimes that occurred that people think may be related to the murder of Elizabeth Short. And one of those is the Cleveland Torso murders. And this is a series of murders that occurred in Cleveland, Ohio between 1934 and 1938. So quite a few years before the murder of Elizabeth Short. But there are some journalists, there are some law enforcement people that have thought there could be a connection between those crimes that occurred in Cleveland and the murder of Elizabeth Short. Now, the LAPD looked into the Cleveland murders, but couldn't find any relationship between the two cases. In the 1980s, there was some renewed interest in the connection between the murder of Elizabeth Short and the Cleveland Torso murders, when an author by the name of John Gilmore, he wrote this book named Severed. And in the book, he talks about how a detective was about ready to arrest a man by the name of Jack Anderson Wilson, who had been a suspect back in the Cleveland Torso murders, but was going to be arrested for the murder of Elizabeth Short. So this generated a lot of interest, again, in the case. The problem is the FBI files didn't back this statement up. All right, Gibbs, let's get into possible suspects. We've already talked about Mark Hansen. We've talked about Robert Manley. So the next person we want to talk about is Leslie Dillon. Leslie Dillon was a bellhop. He was a former mortician's assistant, but he had a known association with Mark Hansen. And there was a book that just came out last year called The Black Dahlia, Red Rose, and it focuses heavily on Leslie Dillon. And in this book, it's alleged that Sergeant Finis Brown, who was one of the lead detectives in the Elizabeth Short murder case, had links to Hansen and was corrupt.
So I guess in this book, it talks about how these individuals were planning to rob some local hotels, and somehow Elizabeth got information about this. And I think at that point they were, as far as the book goes, that they were worried that she could turn them in at that point, that they needed to, get rid of her so that their secret was safe with them. So I think there's some theories are wrapped around that. I mean, to the point that one of the theories is that she was actually killed at the Astor Motel in Los Angeles, where one of the owners of the hotel said they actually, on January 15th of 47, that they found one of the motel rooms covered in blood and fecal matter. I mean, if that's true, that's huge. But, I haven't seen any police report that backs that up. So either, the hotel owners got nervous and had it cleaned up and didn't want to report it. But, I find that a little strange. I think, wouldn't you report that if you had a motel room covered in blood and fecal matter?
You would think so. You would think you'd call the police and have them come in and do an investigation.
There was a retired detective in 2000. His name was Buzz Williams. And he was retired from Long Beach Police Department. But he wrote an article, a newsletter, and he was talking about his father, which was Richard Williams, and his father's best friend, Con Keller, and both of these guys were members of the old L.A. gangster squad. And he remembers that his father believed that Leslie Dillon was the killer and that Dillon returned to his home state of Oklahoma because he could avoid extradition back to California because Dillon's relative was the governor of Oklahoma. Now, Dillon would never confess to the murders. Instead, he claimed that Jeff Connors, a friend of his, was Elizabeth Short's killer. And during this same conversation that the officer was having with Dillon when he mentioned, Connors was the killer, he also told an interesting story to the detective. He was talking about how at one point he was able to bleed a body out prior to embalming the body by making an incision in the upper thigh and inserting a tube to drain the blood. Kind of stuck with the detective. He remembered exactly Dillon saying that. It would be on January 10th that Detective Brown and Hansen questioned Dillon, and they would eventually find out that Jeff Connor's real name was Artie Lane, and that Lane lived in Los Angeles at the time of Elizabeth Short's murder and has worked as a maintenance man basically at the Columbia Studios, which happened to be the favorite place for Elizabeth to hang out as well. I know at one point that there were some theories that maybe Leslie Dillon and Artie Lane could be the same guy, but again, this was never confirmed. It's just another theory. And it would be by the end of 1949 that, Detective Brown basically lost interest in Dillon. So the detectives thought at the time of Elizabeth's murder that Dillon was up in San Francisco. So it was unlikely that he committed the crime. It would be later that Dylan would file a $100,000 claim against the city of Los Angeles for how he felt he was treated during the investigation. But eventually the lawsuit was dropped.
But Gibbs, I think there's a lot of people that like Dylan for the murder. And you could say that about all these different suspects that are still out there. I mean, the one thing that's interesting to me is that he was a former mortician's assistant. He had some knowledge of the human body. He had apparently drained blood from bodies. So you would get some suspicion there, at least in my eyes.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you can see a tie-in pretty easily.
So the next suspect to talk about is a man by the name of George Hodel. And Gibbs, I think this is a guy that a lot of people really think had something to do with the murder. Because number one, I think his own son does, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
But George Hodel was a doctor. And he first kind of came into the spotlight in 1949 because he was accused of molesting his 14-year-old daughter. And he went to trial. He was later acquitted of the charges. But it was this case that kind of put Hodel on the radar of the LAPD in relation to the murder of Elizabeth Short. And they actually put him under surveillance in early 1950. In addition to that, it kind of bugged his home. They were trying to see if he would make any statements related to Short's murder. And he was recorded talking about some things that really piqued the interest of investigators. You know, one part he talked about putting a pillow over her head. Now, he didn't say Elizabeth Short. He used the word her. But then they caught what I consider to be a pretty incriminating statement, which was, supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead. And apparently his secretary had died from a drug overdose. So these comments had the LAPD investigating him for the murder of Elizabeth Short, but then they started investigating him for the murder of his secretary, Ruth Spaulding. Apparently he was there when the secretary died. He had burned some of her possessions before police got there, but the case was ultimately dropped due to lack of evidence. But later on, some documents were found that indicated Spaulding was going to blackmail Hodel because apparently he was doing a bunch of unethical, possibly illegal things in his medical practice when it came to billing, misdiagnosing patients, things like that. So there was some real smoke there, Gibbs, maybe even some fire.
Yeah, it seemed like it, didn't
for the
it?
fact that he could have had something to do with his secretary's death.
Right.
But they never had enough evidence against him in either of these cases. But then his son comes into play, who became a homicide detective with the LAPD. His name is Steve Hodel, and he believes that Elizabeth Short may have been one of his father's patients. And there was some evidence in some of the writings that came out of the district attorney's office back in late 40s, early 50s, talking about a woman who identified Elizabeth Short as one of the girlfriends of Dr. George Hodel. And there were a number of people that said that he confessed to them that he committed the murder, but that police would never be able to prove it. And apparently, Gibbs, a nude photograph of Elizabeth Short was found in Dr. Hodel's possession. Now, George Hodel died in 1999, and it was in 2003 that his son Steve published a book called Black Dahlia Avenger, A Genius for Murder. And it's in this book that he makes the claim that his father committed the murder of Elizabeth Short. And not just that, he claims that his father committed other unsolved murders back from that time period as well.
I mean, he really was like the doctor to the stars to Hollywood back in that day. I think a lot of people went to him for things.
Well, and it sounds like he had a lot of girlfriends.
Had probably some starlets, really.
Right.
Yeah. Because he was so tight with, I think, some studio heads and things like that. So I think he was seen with the in crowd, which is really big back then, I would assume.
No, I'm sure. So I think there is, again, we're always talking about fire and smoke, and there's a lot of smoke, but around a lot of these people, but especially around Leslie Dillon, I think, especially around George Hodel. In the case of George Hodel, he was a doctor. So when you want to talk about police thinking that it was some type of medical personnel that made the cuts, well, here you go. This guy's a doctor. He fits that. It's possible that he had a relationship with Elizabeth Short. It's possible that she was a patient of his, maybe a patient that he misdiagnosed, misbilled, scammed in some way.
Yeah.
She found out. Now, I'm just throwing stuff out there, but there's a lot of things that can happen knowing the fact that it's been said that he did some of these things. Now, there are a lot of people that have looked at the information in this book and thought, okay, he did it. But there's also a lot of people, including, DAs and people like that say, there's not enough here. There wouldn't be enough here to take this case to trial even. Not enough evidence. So you're going to have mixed opinions on all of these suspects. And like we said, Gibbs, we wouldn't have time to go through each and every suspect.
Right.
And then you look at the age of the case. The case is so old. Most of the suspects are deceased.
Yeah. I mean, it's just...
So you couldn't do anything to them anyway.
No, and I think, a lot of this DNA, new testing that's been surfacing with a lot of these cases, I don't know if that would work on this one because of the way that the body was found.
Right. Apparently there was no DNA.
Yeah.
So I don't think you're going to have some kind of magical revelation like you did in the East Area Rapist case or in some of these other cases that you're talking about. But still, it's one of those cases that has fascinated the country, the world even, for a very long time.
I mean, it's one of those cases that's always trending out there. I think
people still talk. I mean, they're making movies about it. There's books that come out about it almost on a yearly basis. There is still a lot of interest in this case, even though it occurred in the 1940s. But that's it. That's it for the case of the murder of Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia.
Yeah.
Gibbs, we got some voicemails. You want to hear those?
Let's hear them.
Hi, Mike and Gibby. This is Jessica Scott over from Nebraska. I just wanted to call and wish Fergie a happy birthday. Very late, but happy birthday. Also, I wanted to check up on Gibby and see how he's doing after that, double hernia. Are you doing your pull-ups or what now? Also, come on. When are we going to get the Gibby Gal t-shirt? Because I really need one. Seriously need one. Anyways, you guys are doing an awesome job. Don't forget that. Seriously, you guys are the best. I love you guys. And, keep your own time ticking. Bye, y'all.
All right. Love that voicemail. Now, she says she's late.
Yeah.
She's not as late as what it appears to be because she probably left that voicemail quite a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're so far behind on voicemails that, it makes it seem like people are later than what they are.
Yeah. But you had a good birthday. So.
No, I did. And you're doing pull-ups.
Right now.
I can see Gibbs from here doing pull-ups.
28, 29.
Hey, Mike and Gibby. This is Charlie Nielsen from Arnold, Missouri. Hey, I just wanted to let you guys know, I wanted to thank you so much for all that you guys do, but mainly I wanted to thank all the supporters of the show as well, Patreon and PayPal. I unfortunately can't provide any money because I have 2 kids with special needs, and I know there's a lot of people who want to, like myself, who just appreciate all that they do and all that you do. You guys are awesome, and keep your own time ticking.
Well, that was different, Gibbs, but very cool voicemail.
Yeah, I like that.
And he's right. There are a lot of people that, if they could, they would support the show financially. Maybe they support it in another way. But he's saying, hey, there are people supporting the show financially, and we appreciate it. And of course, we appreciate it too. But
Absolutely, we do.
But that was a cool voicemail.
Hi, guys. This is Max down in Atlanta. Haven't called in a while. Just wanted to say hi. Heard about the beef jerky from Texas. Maybe it's Bucky's. That's like a big thing down there. And also, I like the last one you did with Peebles, Ohio. I'm glad they didn't take little Jerry Seinfeld down there. I guess grow operation and cockfighting, very, very dangerous. Not surprising. Unfortunate, though. And also, Team Gibby or Gibby's Gals. Every time I'm on Facebook and I see somebody I might know, these incredibly beautiful women, and the only friend in common we have is Gibby. How about that? All right, guys, keep your own time ticking. Love the show. Have a good rest of the summer.
All right, we always love hearing from Max. You're right, he's right. We hadn't heard from him in a while. But as always, Gibbs, Max is dead on.
You got that beef jerky right.
He did. It was actually Bucky's.
It was.
It was awesome. I stole the rest of it.
You did. It was so good,
every
man.
bit of it.
It was good.
But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that
Little Jerry Seinfeld?
no, that was right on the money.
That was good too.
I'm talking about the fact that every time I get a friend request, I see that the person that I have in common is Mike Gibson.
Well, I get the same thing, you know?
I think you're friends with everyone on Facebook. I think there's a limit to how many friends you can have on Facebook.
Yeah, I'm nowhere near that.
Eventually, you're going to hit that.
The 5,000 mark?
Yeah. Is that what it is?
I think it's 5,000. Yeah.
Hi, this is Jill from the suburbs of Chicago, and I just wanted to thank you so much for what an amazing job you guys do. A++, gold stars across the board. I actually wanted to ask how you do the PayPal donations. I'd like to, every time I get a chance, donate $10, $20 at a shot, as opposed to the Patreon. So I like to use my PayPal, and I really couldn't figure out how to do that. So maybe that would help me and other people how to donate. And just thank you so much, and definitely keep your own time ticking.
All right. No, that's something that we probably don't talk about very much. I think it's on the website, the truecrimeallthetime.com website.
It is.
I think there's a PayPal link there, so you can do that. Or when you go into PayPal, you're sending it to True Crime All the Time.
Yeah.
If you put that in, it'll come up. But check out the website. I think there's a link there.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Gibbs, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.